The judges are ready? And the timers? From King? And Grayson? Yeah. I think that's good. Reuters News said in November of 2011, quote, "A financial transactions tax is essentially a sales tax on investors," said Ken Benston, Executive Vice President of the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association. "It would impede the efficiency of markets and impair depth and liquidity, as well as raise costs to the issuers, pensions, and investors who help drive economic growth," end quote. That's essentially what we're going to be looking at in this speech, as we go through several disadvantages of the Affirmative team's plan, but why their plan will not help the United States economy and the stability of the markets, but will only make these problems worse. We're going to be starting with disadvantage 1 of jobs lost. Jobs lost. So we're going to be looking at the United Kingdom. Now, the Affirmative team has prized the United Kingdom's FTT, saying that this is one of the best ways to look at how an FTT in the United States would work. So let's look at how the United Kingdom's FTT is doing so we can compare it to the United States. Item Club Financial Services, part of Ernst & Young, a global think tank on tax and transaction advisory services, said in December of 2011, quote, "The Eurozone FTT could result in around 4,500 job losses in the UK. In order to estimate the potential impact on employment in London, we rely on academic studies of the relationship between stock market volumes and security industry employment based on data from New York. Using multiplier estimates for the financial services industry from Oxford Economics, UK interregional input-output model, we estimate that total job losses in the UK as a whole would be 4,500 jobs," end quote. So there was a lot of technical language about how they reached that estimate, but they did reach the estimate that the United Kingdom FTT is going to result in about 4,500 job losses. So the empirics that the Affirmative team is talking about, those empirics actually work against them because UK's FTT is hurting them and resulting in job losses. Let's look at some evidence that is talking about lower wages from an FTT, so the people who do have jobs would result in lower wages, because the people who pay the FTT tax would pass that cost down to consumers. Charles Orton-Jones, an award-winning business journalist, said in September 30th of 2011, quote, "What did the International Monetary Fund report on Robin Hood taxes in March conclude?" Before we go any further, just to clarify, a Robin Hood tax is a slang for FTT. It's what some people informally call it, so just clean that up. Continuing, quote, "In the short term, the shareholders would pay. Over time, the burden shifts. The IMF said, quote, "In the long run, it would fall on workers, who as a result of the smaller capital stock, would be less productive and receive lower wages. The idea that banks can pay without affecting humans is a fallacy," end quote. What we can see from this piece of evidence is that if you pass an FTT, the people who are paying the tax won't essentially pay that tax. They'll pass that cost down to people who have jobs and by lower wages. That means that people have less money to spend. That means that they're putting less money into the economy, and that money is in the government's hands instead, which means that our economy is harmed. Given the main driving force of the United States economy is consumer spending, when you give all that money to the government instead of the people, our economy stagnates. And that's the impact of economic stagnation. Economic stagnation. Now let's move into a second disadvantage, which is that of investment stifled. Investment stifled. Now, the Affirmative team's plan, the financial transactions tax, is designed to harm short-term traders. But there's two kinds of short-term traders: high-frequency traders, the ones that they talk about, and productive short-term traders that help the economy. The Congressional Budget Office said in December of 2011, quote, "The tax," about a financial transactions tax, "the tax would discourage all short-term trading, not just speculation, including transactions by well-informed traders and transactions that stabilize markets. Empirical evidence provides little indication that a transaction tax would reduce volatility. In fact, a number of research studies have concluded that higher transactions costs are associated with more, not less, volatility," end quote. What we can see is that from empirics, from historical examples, an FTT not only discourages the high-frequency trading, but it discourages short-term productive investment by people who are actually trying to help the economy with real investments. The Affirmative team's plan discourages that kind of trading, and that means that the economy is harmed. It means that volatility is increased, because when you discourage all investment, all productive investment, that harms the economy. Now, while they don't have much of an effect of long-term investment, people who hold a stock for 100 years, or probably less than that, they probably wouldn't live that long, but people who hold a stock for 50 years or a long amount of time, this obviously doesn't affect them, given it's just 0.5%. But it does affect the people who trade under a year, which is what a short-term trader is officially defined as. And these people help the economy with productive investments, and the Affirmative team's plan discourages that kind of trading. That means that the market is hurt, not helped. The Congressional Budget Office The Congressional Budget Office continued to say, quote, the transaction tax would raise the cost of financing investments to the extent it made transactions more expensive, financial markets less liquid, and management of financial risk more costly. Any such rise in financing costs would dampen investment in the next few years. In the short term, a decrease in investment would lower demand for goods and services and thus reduce output and employment. Lower output, employment, and income in the financial sector would lessen the demand for goods and services and reduce gross domestic product and employment, end quote. So what we can essentially see is when you reduce investment, you reduce the economy. That's a logical link. When less people are investing in the economy, less people are putting their money in and taking good risks of investment, that means that the economy is harmed because there's less money going around, and there's less investment in the economy. Investment is crucial to a healthy economy, and the Affirmative plan discourages good investment. Let's move now into a third disadvantage, which is that of efficiency impeded. Efficiency impeded. Now, financial transactions tax, by putting a tax in place in the market, it essentially distorts the incentives there and impedes efficiency. Parthasarathi Shum, PhD in economics, said in April of 2011, quote, a tax on financial transactions is a tax that is considered to be distortive. It could therefore have wide adverse economic impacts downstream. The economic effects of FTT on capital markets are pervasive. They may impose significant efficiency costs by increasing the cost of capital to firms. This would distort the smooth functioning of financial markets and affect input choices. The increase in costs could reduce investment and subsequently GDP growth, end quote. So what we can see from that piece of evidence is, again, investment decreases because the market is less efficient. By putting a tax into the market, taxes put in place by the government are generally considered to be distortive because they introduce a third party into the equation, so to speak. It's not just two traders figuring out what the prices are. They have to equate the tax into it now and how that changes things, and that distorts the incentives there. And by putting that tax in place of a financial transactions tax, you'd be impeding the efficiency of the market, which would only hurt the United States, not help it. Let's move now to a fourth disadvantage, which is that of volatility increased. Volatility increased. Christopher L. Culp, PhD in finance, said, quote, FTT proponents claim that a major goal of the tax is the reduction in the volatility of asset prices. Available empiric evidence, however, does not support the assertion that FTTs will improve the informational efficiency of financial markets. Most empirical studies find that FTTs either have no effect on price variability or find that increases in FTT tax rates have been followed by increases in price variability. Now listen to this. These results, based on studies of changes of FTT rates in China, Finland, Greece, the United Kingdom, which is the one that the Affirmative team keeps talking about, and elsewhere, are generally consistent with the view that the decrease in market depth and liquidity resulting from FTT rates are more significant than the factors that might tend to depress volatility, end quote. What this simply means is that the Affirmative team's plan won't decrease volatility, that based on studies from countries like the UK that have had FTTs, it increased the price variability of the market and only harmed the economy. So for these reasons, I ask you to vote for the relative safety of the status quo. Thank you. I'm open to any questions the Affirmative speaker may have for me.
Judges ready? All right. Timer. Roman, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you, Justin?
I'm doing great. Just had a couple of questions for you.
All right.
First off, under job loss, just basically looking at these first three disadvantages as a whole, your argument under here is that jobs would be lost because the cost would be passed down to consumers.
That was the argument under the first disadvantage. First, I talked about how the UK is facing job loss because of FTT, and secondly, I talked about wages being decreased because of passing the cost
All right.
down.
Talking about the UK, could I see that piece of evidence?
Definitely.
All right. And did this say that the UK did lose jobs, or that it's projected to lose jobs if they adopted an FTT?
Well, first off, they do have an FTT. Second off,
Okay.
they said that they probably are going to lose jobs.
All right. Now, is this the bilateral FTT that they're proposing in the UK, or is this the FTT that they currently have on the London Stock Exchange?
I'm not entirely sure. Either way, it does apply to the United States as well.
All right. My partner will be addressing that.
All right.
But once again, the link here is basically that the cost of capital increases to users.
The piece of evidence there didn't establish why the jobs would be lost in the UK. That link there of the passing the cost on to consumers was in my lower wages argument.
Okay, but your arguments under disadvantage number 2 and 3 were based on the increasing cost of capital to users.
Disadvantage 2 was about how you discourage all short-term trading, not just high-frequency traders. That discourages productive investment. Disadvantage 3 was about how introducing a distortion impedes efficiency. So those weren't necessarily the same argument there.
Okay, all right. Now, talking about volatility increase, can I see the piece of evidence from Parthasarathi Shom? I just wanted to see if I could pronounce that name.
Sure.
I'd like to see the evidence too.
Sure, this one was actually under the efficiency disadvantage. Right?
Okay, efficiency disadvantage.
Yep.
Okay, now you said in the United Kingdom that volatility was increased. Once again, was this a projection or was this looking at the market historically?
This was looking at how FTTs have affected the markets of, it said China, Finland, Greece, Sweden, Taiwan, UK, and elsewhere. So it mentioned those studies talking about the empirics of an FTT and how that affected volatility.
Okay. Can I steal that from you as well?
Of course.
All right, thank you. Now talking about, you said that this won't affect long-term investment. So is it the negative team stance that we do in fact increase long-term investment?
No, it's not my stance that you increase long-term investment. My stance was essentially that...
Was that contested?
Was that contested?
Was our impact of productive investment increased contested?
Yeah, my partner talked about how FTTers would just evade, basically.
Okay.
How that happened in other countries.
All right, thank you. We'll be addressing that.
All right.
Okay, so once again, your arguments here is that the cost of capital increases to users.
Only under disadvantage 1, under the lower wages argument. The other ones were about, the disadvantage 2 was about short-term investors being discouraged. Disadvantage 3 was about efficiency being competed by distortions. And disadvantage 4 was about volatility because of historical examples.
And the
So
investors are discouraged because of the higher cost of transactions?
Right, but the part about the lower wages argument from passing on to consumers was specific to disadvantage 1. Under the other 3 disadvantages, I was looking at the other facts.
Could I see the CBO evidence that you read?
Of course. Right here.
Thank you, Roman.
Thank you.